Hello, my name is Nick Spielman. This is my presentation for DTSC 690. Today I'm going to be looking at the philosopher John Searle's concept of the Chinese room and how it relates to modern large language models like ChatGPT. So to get started, I think most folks are probably familiar with Alan Turing and the Turing test. He formulated it in 1950, saying that, basically if a human interrogator is unable to determine whether a subject is human or a computer, we can reasonably say that the computer is intelligent. In 1980, the philosopher John Searle challenged that and said, just because something appears intelligent doesn't mean it's actually intelligent. Just because it looks like it understands doesn't mean it does understand. Excuse me. In his own words, in 1999, he put it this way. Imagine a native English speaker who knows no Chinese locked in a room full of boxes of Chinese symbols, a database, together with a book of instructions for manipulating the symbols, the program. Imagine that people outside the room send in other Chinese symbols which, unknown to the person in the room, are questions in Chinese, the input. And imagine that by following the instructions in the program, the man in the room is able to pass out Chinese symbols which are correct answers to the questions, the output. The program enables the person in the room to pass the Turing test for understanding Chinese, but he does not understand a word of Chinese. So, the question we're trying to get at, ultimately, is are modern large language models intelligent? Are LLMs intelligent? I think the first question, is do they pass the Turing test? UC San Diego study found that GPT 3.5 in a Turing test was only identified as human 20% of the time. GPT-4 did a little bit better at 50%, which may not seem great until you consider the fact that humans were only identified as human 66% of the time. So that, coupled with the proliferation of troll bots on social media who are endlessly baiting people into arguments, I think it's reasonable to say that modern LLMs pass the Turing test, if not with flying colors, at least with a passing grade. But are they just high-functioning Chinese rooms? And if they are, how would we know? I'm going to try to get at that today. We'll get into the specifics later, but broadly, my plan is, what I'm wondering is, can I create symbols that would cause a breakdown of the system if it is a Chinese room? Can I pass those symbols into the system, and can I evaluate the quality of the symbols that are returned to us from the Chinese room, if it is a Chinese room? So let's talk about the Chinese room. Let's understand it a little more. So this was first formulated by John Searle in a speech he gave to the Yale AI lab in 1980. He was refuting what's called the computational theory of mind. The computational theory of mind basically says, look, brains are computers. A brain is just a computer. If a mind and consciousness can arise in the brain, then a mind and consciousness can arise in anything that does computations. John Searle was refuting that, and he gives the example of the Chinese room to refute that. So imagine a room. In that room is a man who speaks English but no Chinese. There's also a box full of notes with Chinese symbols in it in that room, and an instruction manual. Outside the room is a woman who speaks Chinese but no English. She passes a note in Chinese into the room. The man takes that note, looks it up in his instruction manual, finds the corresponding note that the instructions say to pass back. He passes that note back out to the woman. She reads the note. It's a valid response to the question she slid into the room, and she figures, okay, there must be a Chinese speaker in that room. But the man does not understand Chinese, right? At least that's what John Searle contends. He specifically said this is a refutation of strong AI, not weak AI, right? Strong AI, as John Searle puts it, is that computers can understand and think in ways similar to human beings. He has no problem with the weak AI thesis, as he puts it, that computers can only appear to understand and think in ways similar to human beings. And I think, given the quality of modern chatbots, I think it's hard to refute the weak AI thesis. I think that would be bonkers. But can computers understand and think in ways similar to human beings? I think that's still very much unclear. There are common replies to the Chinese room argument. The first one and the most common one, I think the strongest one, is the systems reply, which says, well, look, Yeah, the man following the manual doesn't understand Chinese, and maybe the manual doesn't understand Chinese, and the database of notes, the box of notes doesn't understand Chinese. But when you add all of those together as a system, they seem to understand Chinese, right? Like the system understands Chinese. I think that's the most common and probably the strongest reply, and I think that's the one that holds up. There's also the robot reply, which basically says, a brain, a disembodied brain can't understand anything. It's not interacting with the world in any symbolic way. But if we could put that computer inside a body and let that body interact with the world like a robot, then maybe a computer could think. There's the brain simulator reply, which basically says, well, what if we program a perfect simulation of the brain? Wouldn't that think? And I think John Searle says, yeah, basically the brain would be thinking, but the program running the brain would not be thinking, which feels like splitting hairs to me. There's the other minds reply. There's a whole subgenre of philosophy dealing with philosophical zombies. The idea that you can't know what's going on inside someone else's mind just because they appear to be conscious doesn't mean they are. And so this says, you know nothing, John Searle. You don't know what's going on inside that computer. Maybe it is thinking, you don't know. And it's closely related to the intuition reply, which is basically just saying, you're just going on vibes here, John. You don't know. This is just how it feels to you. So all of those, though, John Searle will say none of those address the formal argument, the formal version of the argument, which, as he puts it, is programs are purely formal or syntactical. Minds, human ones at least, have semantics, mental, i.e. semantic contents. Syntax by itself is neither the same as nor sufficient for semantic content, and therefore programs by themselves are not constitutive nor sufficient for minds. And I think that the big weakness of this argument here is the third premise, and that it is not self-evident to me that syntax by itself is is not sufficient for semantic content. That is not self-evident to me. We don't know how understanding arises. We don't know how minds arise. We don't know how consciousness arises. We don't know where any of those things come from, and it is not self-evident to me that they can't arise from syntax alone. I think we'll see some evidence for that later. What about LLMs specifically? There's been some talk about this. I couldn't find a lot of research specifically relating to LLMs in Chinese rooms, but there's a famous paper that made a lot of headlines by Bender et al. That calls them stochastic parrots, right? Which I think is just a catchy way of saying Chinese room, right? The idea is that these are just sophisticated statistical models that mimic human speech. They're not actually speaking. There's no understanding. They're just really good word prediction models, which I think is true, but it's not evident to me that no understanding arises from that. There's also research done with Google's BERT system. It was able to make correct logical inferences 77% of the time. But when they refinessed the prompts to make what they called adversarial prompts, to make them less intuitive and remove the ability of the AI to use clue words, the inferences went down to 50%, so no better than random chance. I don't know that logical inferences are synonymous with meaning, so I don't know that that's particularly relevant here, but I think it is worth mentioning. So, can we confuse the Chinese room, right? Can we break the Chinese room? If LLMs are a Chinese room, can we break them? And if so, how? So what happens in the Chinese room if symbols it doesn't recognize are passed into it? And can we design prompts for ChatGPT that will result in incoherent or confused responses? And logistically, how do we do this? So what I did was I built a simple Python program that passes parameters. It passes to various models and various temperatures. The temperature sort of controls the creativity of a chat model. It passes a series of the same prompts to various models and iterations of various models and temperatures over and over again. It logs those conversations. I pass the exact same prompts to human subjects. I logged those conversations, and I wrote a little script that extracts all of those responses, puts them into a database, and then created a scoring program that let my friends go through and score the responses based on how well the subject understood the prompt they were responding to. And hopefully at the end of all that, we can see how well they actually understand. All of those scripts, this PowerPoint, the scripts, the database, the logs, the chat logs, they're all available at my GitHub there. GitHub.com/NickSpielman bot if anyone wants to go check them out. Some caveats here. So this isn't a proper experiment, somewhere between an experiment and an art project. I can't prove understanding here. I can't prove the affirmative. One, because like we talked about, the philosophical zombie problem, other minds are unknowable. I can't know what's going on in there. An sufficiently advanced Chinese room could solve all of these prompts. There's no upper limit on how good the Chinese room can be. But I do think a failure at these prompts would I think confirm a lack of understanding. I think if it fails at answering these prompts correctly, then I think we can say that this is a Chinese room. There is no understanding here. The final caveat is this isn't a simple, clear test, right? This is not yes, it understands or no, it doesn't understand. That's why I tried to have multiple people rate these responses to try to get the wisdom of the crowds to approximate an objective test. So the prompts, there were 4 types of prompts. There were 3 that were designed to confuse. The first were syntactically valid but ambiguous sentences, things like, how did you find the apple? There were syntactically valid sentences but contained novel words in its training set. Things like, John is a turgler, he's always turgling his car, etc. What does turgle mean? Syntactically valid but semantically meaningless sentences, so nonsense sentences that mean nothing. And then finally, some that were designed to assess semantic understanding directly in the form of analogies. Every time the prompt ended with the phrase, please elaborate on your thought process, because, John Searle formulated the strong AI thesis. The thesis he purports to refute is a computer could be programmed in such a way that it would possess a mind in the same way as a human, and such computer programming would be able to articulate the workings of its mind. So I think it's relevant here to see how well the subjects can elaborate, can explain their responses. So what do we get results? So I ended up with 12 GPT subjects, 4 models at 3 different temperature levels, 7 human subjects, giving me a total of 208 scoreable responses. I removed nonsense responses. They ended up being too hard to score. We'll come back to those later. There's some interesting stuff there anyway. There were various anomalies, encoding problems, Zoom chat issues, things like that had to remove some responses. But I ended up with 572 scores. And those scores were scaled on a scale of 1 to 4. The subject demonstrates no understanding. The subject demonstrates some understanding, the subject demonstrates a good understanding, or the subject demonstrates a masterful and insightful understanding. So each response was rated on a scale of 1 to 4 by multiple people. And the result is the human mean of those responses was 2.89. So humans, on average, pretty well understood the responses. But the bot's mean was 3.16, and the p-value there is 6.51 times 10 to the negative 5. So the p-value is very tiny. This is a statistically significant result we've got here. This chart shows you how the results stack up, right? Bots score higher than humans. Bots have more 3 and 4s, and humans have more 1s and 2s. The people scoring these responses, many of them were jaded and cynical and not fans of AI. And they still scored the bots higher. I tried to drill down and see if there was a difference between different types of responses, different models, different temperatures. No significant. There was nothing significant in any of those. There were differences, but it was all just noise. There was nothing statistically significant there. Again, if you want to look at these numbers yourself, github.com/NickSpielman bot. It's all available there. So those are the numbers, but I think there's some subjective stuff here that's worth talking about too. Coming back to the strong AI thesis, specifically the idea that a computer program would be able to articulate the workings of its mind, right? This is the thesis Searle is refuting, that a computer would be able to articulate the workings of its mind. And I think a big part of the reason the bots scored higher is because they were able to more clearly articulate their reasoning than the human subjects were often. It's hard to argue when reading some of these responses that there's no understanding, right? Here's a prompt. Complete the sentence. Time is to aging as Jupiter is to. Please elaborate on your thought process. This is a pretty typical bot response here. It's thoughtful. It's interesting. Time is to aging as Jupiter is to orbiting moons, right? Time influences aging. Jupiter influences its orbiting moons. That's the parallel there. I think it's a pretty interesting reply to a difficult prompt. This is a typical human response to the same prompt. Quote, no guess. Didn't even venture a guess here. There is, I said we'd come back to the nonsense prompts, though. What I did find was interesting, though, was that the nonsense prompts, here's a nonsense prompt. Consider this sentence, the bear is a triangle. Will it zoom? Complete nonsense. It makes no sense. Typical bot response to this was basically, yeah, this is nonsense. I can't parse this. I don't understand what you're asking. Based on the given information, we can't accurately determine, quote, if it will zoom. More information is needed to give a fitting response. Excuse me. So yeah, bots correctly identified to them as nonsense and said, I can't answer that. Humans, however, here's a pretty typical human response. Yeah, shape has no bearing on whether an animal will zoom or not. It is all about the desire to zoom, right? So humans, this brings me to this quote. Man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. I take culture to be those webs and the analysis to be, therefore, not an experimental science in search of law, but an interpretive one in search of meaning, right? So humans are machines that create meaning, right? Understanding and meaning are not the same thing. Understanding for humans, to understand something as a human is a creative act. It means of finding meaning in something. Whereas, these bots, I think, really are just pattern recognition machines. That doesn't mean they don't understand. I think that is a different question from whether or not they understand. I think some real understanding has arisen from the syntactic programming. I think the system reply is probably correct. And that, well, it would be accurate to say that the statistical model itself understands. The system as a whole seems to understand what it's doing. It seems to understand what it's talking about. But that is different than than for humans to find meaning in something and for humans to create meaning out of nothing. So next steps. I thought this was a pretty successful proof of concept. I thought this was fun. Something I'd like to play around with more. Next time I would build a better chat interface for the humans to get rid of some of those anomalies. I tried to get more people to rate. I tried to get better ratings. I think it would be great to get English teachers to rate these things. I tried to get a better sample. And I try to get an individualized scale for each type of prompt. So that it could include nonsense prompts, because I think that might change the results. I think it'd be interesting to see. Here my works cited, tiny little text. If you want to, this PowerPoint is in the GitHub repository. If you want to see the works cited, you can go to the GitHub, nickspielman.com/ or github.nickspielman/CRA bot if you want to see the works cited. Okay, thanks.